Welcome to the Nonessential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock. And
thanks for rejoining us.
I love that I said
again.
I was ready to record and then immediately had to fight off a burp.
Well, that's part of what makes our show authentic and professional.
I don't think I've ever been ready to record actually on this show in my life, and it's just more like fuck it, let's just do it.
I love that we do the behind the scenes, let's make sure our mics are picking up and the levels are good and whatever. And so we test, and then as soon as I start, my volume's up 3 notches from when we're just talking.
Right.
So
yeah, because
any balancing goes out the fucking window, right? We're just that excited to have you back.
We actually don't have microphones. We yell this and hope that you can hear it from your house.
Somebody somewhere is recording.
So yeah, give us that feedback. If you can't hear us, we'll try to scream louder. If you don't know what the Non-Essential Podcast is, it's me and Steve. We get together every week and we tell each other stories. That's basically it.
Random stories, sometimes true, sometimes we'll read works of fiction, sometimes they're half true, half not, whatever. They're just stuff. Interesting things.
Weird shit that we found. Last week we talked about a shitty robber who was a lot better at being dead than being alive. A much bigger success.
He might be one of my favorites so far. Between his lack of robbing skills and the fact that his first name was Elmer, which it's hard to not like somebody named Elmer. You get that pity angle in there. It's dude's named Elmer.
Maybe I hear Elmer and I think you're an automatic piece of shit. Shout outs to all of our Elmer fans out there.
Yeah, we're going to find out when we post this episode that 90% of our audience is named Elmer. It's fuck.
That's the only email we get is just a bunch of from Elmer, and every subject line is, hey. Yeah, and we also talked about some Vikings who couldn't get a fucking map.
Right. They were mostly successful. They weren't all around successful, but they were mostly successful except for at being where they wanted to be.
They were really good at conquering things except what they said they conquered.
Right. But it just shows that, as a Viking, they didn't really care. It's just sail, see something, sack it, go on.
Yeah.
Cha-ching.
And that's really what it's about. It's not what you said you did. It's how confidently you say you did it.
How bloody are your clothes when you return home?
And no one will care.
So that was last week. This week we got different stuff.
This week we got I brought a Russian serial killer.
Oh, Russia! I knew you had tweeted that you were going to have a fun time with the names. I didn't realize Russia. Good luck.
You're right. The hardest part about getting my notes together this week was trying to figure out how some of these names were pronounced. And I never really did figure it out, so let's butcher them together, shall we? Darya...
Butcher,
Darya Nikolayevna, I don't know, maybe that's how it's pronounced, Saltykova, was a Russian countess born in 1730.
Saltykova, I like to think it's just Kova's the name, but she was just particularly salty.
It's spelled that way. It's salty and then Kova. And I'm sure somebody, who's a little more familiar with the Russian language would be that's you don't pronounce the T or the Y, and the L is pronounced like a CH or something. They'll have some fucking shit that doesn't make any sense to me because I'm ignorant as fuck.
Yes.
So Darya, as I will refer to her from now on, was a Russian countess born in 1730, and she was rich as shit. Her family was well connected to other prominent Russian families like the Davidovs, the Tolstoys, the Mushin Pushkins, and it may seem like I made those names up, but I didn't.
Well, the first two, I'm I've heard those names before. I don't want to make it sound like I read Russian literature or whatever, but yeah, I'm a little familiar with Russian. I try to teach myself Russian, so know a little bit.
Well, I wouldn't have even mentioned that if it wasn't for the Mushin Pushkins.
Right, that's where you got me.
Which sounds like a great band name. Anyway, so Once she reached that time's idea of adulthood, she married a man named Gleb Saltykov. And that moved her even higher up the social ladder thanks to his name's prominence. She had 2 sons with him, and by all accounts, she seemed like the typical Russian noblewoman. Gleb died when she was 26, leaving her a widow, but the fact that she had his sons kept her social and wealth status secure. If she hadn't had children, the Saltykov family probably would have told her to fucking pound sand.
Fuck off, yeah.
Because that's how in-laws were back then, and that's kind of how they are today. Even during her marriage, nothing seemed to really stand out about Darya besides a noticeably gloomy demeanor. But she was a pious woman who had a strong generosity when it came to church and monastery donations. So she was just kind of mopey, people seem to notice. But other than
like the Darya that I'm semi-familiar with. Yeah. So if I just start going na 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 or whatever throughout the show, it's because
Well, Darya I probably would have watched that show if it ended like this. One day after her husband's death, she met a young fella named Nikolai Chuchev. It's Tyutchev. Grandfather of famous Russian poet Fyodor. See, like, these fucking names. They are all... There's so many consonants and shit crammed together, but the pronunciations are all supposed to be like Lord of the Rings cities or something. But she met a guy named Nikolai, and as she was getting older in years and lonely, she started an affair with him that would raise her spirits somewhat. Until she found out he had been sleeping with a younger girl and had even secretly married her.
That tends to end a romance.
Right. Saltykova was pissed and in a jealous rage nearly killed Nikolai, forcing him and his new wife to go into hiding. They ran to Moscow and then ultimately fled the region. They were that afraid of Darya. And Darya, with good reason, Darya genuinely wanted to kill them, and their escape was the only thing that, took away that opportunity for her.
Sure. And it sounds like her station at this point was higher in society than his.
Yeah, and that's the fucked up thing is, like, this is high class, like, Russian society at that time, and you imagine this kind of older for the time countess who just wants to beat somebody to death. And I say that I use the word genuinely because after they had escaped, the gloomy countess flipped into a rage-filled fucking lunatic who took all her anger out on her serfs, usually women, and the younger they were, the worse she treated them. She saw them as rivals now, and
right. That's what I was going to say. I imagine when you find out your lover was seeing a younger woman, that kind of ruins you on all younger women. You get suspicious.
Well, some people get a little suspicious. There might be a little paranoia. You might need a little bit of therapy. Darya didn't go that route. She instead decided to show no mercy, even if they were pregnant women or they were children. She would beat them, break their bones, throw them out of the house into the frost with no clothes, pour boiling water on them, among tons of other fucking horrors. She didn't kill men usually. There were only reports of 3 accidental deaths with men, which I love the term accidental death in description of torture, because it's like you wanted to inflict as much pain as possible, but whoops.
Yeah, like I imagine that the court system wouldn't draw that same, like, oh, well, you just you meant to just hurt them a lot. But...
Yeah. Whoops, it turns out I whipped a little too much. But yeah, so only 3 men died in her little spree. But I'm
a little worried when you say only 3 men.
The numbers get bad for sure. But she would kill the people that men loved to punish them. So she would kill wives and children. Like, that was their punishment they would have to watch. So hot take here, Darya fucking sucked.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Like, underneath all that gloomy, quiet bullshit was a fucking monster. But the weird thing was there was, like, no real reason for her anger. Like, she had that instance with Nikolay, but she would just snap for no fucking reason out of nowhere and just like start throwing like logs at servants for not liking how they cleaned. And then it quickly jumped to, whipping and torture. Like she just became a full-blown fucking sadist.
Which seems like a weird step to take when you originally describe her as like almost nothing unusual about her at all. Like she just blend into the furniture, except for she was like a pious and giving woman.
Right.
And then she wasn't.
She kind of kept to herself or whatever. And then like, a lover spurn just fucking became Elizabeth Bathory. So like, let's see, like early complaints to authorities were ignored. Like if you were a serf, like people didn't really give you the time of day. It was total, like authorities were dealing with real crimes, like how high were your socks?
Did something to deserve to be beaten, that kind of thing.
Right. And she was just so well connected that like, no authority would take it seriously. It would end up taking like a massive uproar from the victims' families to finally get Darya arrested and tried. And that started in 1762 when two serfs escaped Darya's estate and went to St. Petersburg to bring a petition before Empress Catherine II, which is the easiest name out of all the names I had to go through to do this story this week. The Empress ordered the College of Justice to investigate the torture and murder claims because she had just actually passed a lawfulness initiative that she was very serious about. Like, we need to be an orderly nation. And if Darya's doing this shit, that makes me look dumb as fuck.
Right.
So Darya was arrested and held for 6 years as authorities conducted their investigation.
That's a hell of an investigation.
Well, yeah, while many surviving victims and witnesses were afraid to give evidence, it's especially hard now, but it's also damn near impossible in the 1700s to hide the fact that you probably killed over 100 people. Darya was not considered crazy or ill, but she was completely unrepentant and wouldn't confess. For some reason, she was just confident that her social stature would lead to her escaping any sort of comeuppance. Forensic detectives believe that over a 6 to 7 year period, Darya had murdered 139 people by various means. Again, only 3 of them being men. Some victims were as young as 10 years old. Ultimately, though, she was only found guilty of 38 of them, which is enough.
That's a pretty good record. That's only like a quarter.
Which is enough for the maximum punishment, but seems like a lot of bullshit to me, where like there's that many suspicious deaths and she's linked to all of them, but you can't even break 50 on her guilty count. Like that seems fucking ridiculous to me.
My guess is that they kind of got to a certain point and they're like, this is a lot of work.
We're at 38. But oddly enough, you would think like that would be an immediate death sentence, but the death penalty had just been abolished in Russia in 1754. So the Empress needed the nobility's support to extend an appropriate punishment. Darya was sentenced to life imprisonment with a preceding civil execution in the Red Square of Moscow. This consisted of her receiving a public beating, chained to a platform for an hour in front of a crowd, with a sign around her neck that read, "This woman has tortured and murdered." She was then hauled away to a monastery dungeon in chains. Most of her sentence was spent in this wooden room in complete darkness, other than a candle which would be brought and taken away with her meals every day. She would eventually be allowed to be escorted somewhere near a church where she could hear the services, but she was never permitted to actually enter a church. After 11 years of basically living in darkness, she was transferred to one of the monastery buildings where her room had a shuttered window through which she would spit at curious spectators and try to hit them with a stick.
Well, I mean, you got to entertain yourself somehow, right?
Right. And that's basically her story. She died in 1801 at 71 years old, 33 of those years in prison.
Nice.
So
she sounds like a wonderful person to work for.
you know, because I mentioned, I name dropped Elizabeth Bathory because that's the first thing I went to reading this story, and I don't know how familiar you are with that story. It's a little more well known, but it's kind of the same shit. Like, it just, like, there were just a couple of countesses in history who just, like, they really fucking got off at the idea of just fucking up their servants. And it's brutal. Like, it's some...
What's weird to me is how quickly that seemed to start with her. Like, normally you get little, unless there's just stuff that history missed, like until it got to, all of a sudden she was unchecked, and that's when all of a sudden it started being recorded. But normally you get little hints of things, like the cliche, you know, all the serial killers that start by, like, torturing and beating animals, or, you know, that kind of thing.
But I mean, and I wonder if, like, you know, if there was any of that, like the things I was reading on her, like, you don't really know much about her until she starts doing this shit. Because it's like, you know, she got married, you know, she had kids, and then the husband died, had the affair, and then fucking lost it. And it's weird. Like, I always find this stuff interesting where, like, it seems like people just had that shit so well hidden for so long. You know, like...
or something just flipped. The other thing is, back then, and I go to this for a lot of things, and there's a lot of different things that play into it, but lead poisoning was a big thing back then, because lead was considered like a sought-after commodity, but it also, like, is terrible for you. Lead poisoning, and that part of it affects your, you know, it'll make you crazy.
Right.
But it could be like dementia or whatever, because a lot of that stuff wasn't diagnosed at all. You know, if it got to the point where you were, like, crazy and you couldn't put two words together, they'd, like, say, oh, it's demons or something. But, like, you kind of wonder if she had, like, some kind of mental, more than just the mental break, like, oh, he cheated on me with this younger woman. Like, if there was something else that contributed to it instead. But...
like, that kind of... Yeah, I imagine, like, being a widow and then, like, thinking, like, oh, you found companionship again, and then, like, feeling like you've been betrayed. Like, I'm sure, you know, that's a trigger, but that happens to a lot of people. Yeah. You know,
and it's so weird that she would take it out mostly on, like, servants. Like, normally you target... Now, obviously, she did target a little bit based on that. Like,
it was women,
a little bit when it was women, right? But there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to, like, their station in life or their age or their actions. It was just like, oh, every woman I'm going to kill now.
It was probably a lot of, like, oh, their property, you know. You know, they, like, I'm sure part of it was that sort of jealousy of, like, you know, how they looked. It didn't matter their stature. Like, if they were young and full of life, like, to Darya, it probably pissed her off just to have women around her. But they were women that were under her authority in her mind. And in some ways it was true. It took them fucking years to finally authorities to arrest her.
That's the thing that blows my mind too. It shows how messed up things were back then, when not only could people be your property, like, I mean, they didn't call it slaves, but it sounds like that's what they were, but that you could own so many of them that you kill 138 before anybody could even get word that something's going on.
To get people to care. And there is you can see there's still an element of, like, law versus, like, class. Like, and that's true in our society. That's true in every society that's ever been and probably ever will be. Because you see people, like, you know, two people can get charged for the same crime, but how much money they have really affects, like, how they have to
punishment is, right?
What the punishment is, what the process is for them. You know, and it's really fucked up, and you can, like, go throughout history and see all this shit where it's like, even in the 1700s, like, if any serf tried to, like, go on a fucking serial killing spree, you know, they would, like, catch, like, well, they would probably catch, like, 5 of them and say each one did it.
Right.
And hope that one of them was right. But, you know, you get a countess doing like the same behavior, if not like a million times worse. And it's like, oh, well, do you know who she knows? We can't just arrest her. It's really fucked up.
And the sad thing there is that usually comes down to money. Like, well, if we arrest her, she'll quit donating to the, policeman's ball, not that, but that in a roundabout way, that's what it comes down to. And then one of my questions that I had throughout your story that you may or may not know the answer to, how do you dispose of 138 bodies without somebody noticing? Like, that's generally what kind of starts to get you is like,
well, I mean,
another load of corpses for the corpse man.
Well, I imagine that was probably an element of the investigation, was just how much like digging up they had to do and shit.
Like, do you think she just had a basic, how like a lot of elderly people, or even like not, but you get the hoarders that like have piles of newspapers. She just had piles of beaten and dead like serfs.
I imagine, like, when I read the story, I don't have a concrete answer for you, but like reading the story, I imagine like she really didn't seem to like connect that like these were people and you can't just do this,
right?
And it's all part of that ownership thing, and so I imagine like she probably disposed of the bodies, but I doubt she like put that much thought into it. So like in my mind, I always imagined
if you're
like,
not even being that careful about it because you don't think it sounds to me like she didn't even consider it a crime. Like,
right. But how many people are going through like your trash or whatever in those days? Or like whatever you would do for
I suppose
waste.
If you had a big estate, it was probably just pits that you normally threw your refuse in. I know they...
Yeah, or maybe they burnt them or something. Like, I don't have a set answer, but it's like... It was such a probably casual thing in her mind of like, okay, get rid of this one. So fuck you, Darya, you fucking psycho.
The other thing that stuns me, and to me it's almost like if I had, if I was stuck under the rule of a tyrant like that and they killed me, it's like, yeah, that sucks, I don't want to die, but you killed me. But when you talked about how she wouldn't kill men, but she would kill their loved ones in front of them to punish them, like, to me, that's like almost the worst that, almost worse than the killings themselves, is killing somebody else's loved one in front of them. But then that also like boggles my mind. Again, I'm not trying to be like, oh, victim blaming here or whatever, because there's a ton that goes into it, class wise, psychology wise, everything else. Right. But I'd like to think if somebody murdered my wife in front of me to get back at me, I'd do every fucking thing I can to kill that person, even if I die in the process. And it's like, oh, but if you kill a wealthy person, they're going to execute. I wouldn't fucking care at that point. You just killed my wife. Like, that'd be my only goal left in life. If I get executed afterwards, great. I accomplished my goal. But it's easy to say that because we're not in that situation.
Right. And there's a whole, like, there's so many parts of history that show why that's easier said than done. Like, just the mental hold of being under somebody's thumb.
Right. Generally, there's other loved ones out there, so you fear if you try and fail, they'll keep killing your. So I mean, like I said, there's a lot that goes into it, but it's easy to sit here and think, man, how didn't one of these servants just say enough's enough?
And a lot of these serfs, like around that time, they had multiple wives. So, which isn't to say like, oh, I got plenty of them. It's saying like they actually did have other people they had to take care of,
live for it, right?
So like you couldn't just like throw your life away for one person a lot of the time. But yeah, it's a really fucked up situation, and it's really fucked up to look at how people just control your mind, like when you're in a specific social system and you're on the bottom rung of it. And just like how the people above you convince you that like you are powerless. Yeah. Even though like we can look back on this moment and like, why didn't like just like 10 of them just beat the shit out of this woman? Well,
I didn't even consider that angle. Like you said, they have families too, and they know. And I know this through. I'm reading a book right now, but it takes place back in the middle 1800s, so a little bit later, but same kind of deal. And part of it has to do, I don't want to say too much because I might use it as a topic someday. It's a really neat story. But one of the gentleman in it, his fears is that, you know, he's away from his family, and if anything happens to him, he's like, he's not worried about, like, if he dies, he can't stop thinking about, are they starving to death right now because I'm not there to provide for them? Right. So you have that. Like, it's easy to say, like, oh, if you killed my wife, I wouldn't care if you killed me afterwards. It's like, but I probably would care if I had children or a bunch of other families to, you know, to support, you know, then, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. The other really interesting thing that I couldn't help but think about, though, as you talked about Darya, was you mentioned she had kids. Imagine, like, from their perspective, if your mom, like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, by the way, your mom killed 138 people. Like, do you think they knew as it was going on? If they still lived with her, obviously they would have. Yeah. But it sounds like she was more advanced in her age at that point.
They never really go into the kids there. I imagine they probably were more locked into, like, their dad's side of the family, and it kind of probably was, like, a big source of shame and embarrassment or whatever. But you know, who's to say? Like I said, like, this is a weird one where it's like you think there'd be a bit more fleshed out details, but all the articles I found on this were very like, this is how she killed, this is how she was caught. You know, it's why it's a bit of a shorter story this week. And you know, this was what she was like in prison. It doesn't really go into, like, the details of, like, her relationships or whatever, because by all accounts, it seems like she didn't really have much as far as relationships go. Like, you know, she had that affair and then she fucking lost it.
Which might explain why she didn't have a lot of relationships. You know, on their first date, they're like, oh man, dinner's going so well. So how are your serfs doing? I wish they were dead. Like,
they pissed me off.
Yeah, I might kill a few tonight when I go home. Oh, I've got to go. I'll certainly send a telegram, though, later. I guess telegrams probably weren't around in the 1700s.
I'll send them a fax.
I'll email you. What's email? You don't worry about it.
Shut up.
No, I'm not going to do it anyway.
This is how a serial killer invented email. Yeah, so that's what I got this week.
So, I got somebody completely different.
Hi. Hello, someone completely different.
No, for something completely different. So, Martha Marek, born Martha Lowenstein in 1904, found herself orphaned at a young age. In her youth, she was raised by a poor family in post-Depression Vienna. Martha never had much to call her own, but by the age of 15, she found work in a dress shop. It was there that the teen came to the attention of a wealthy department store owner, Moritz Frischt.
Yeah.
The 74-year-old Frischt took Martha in as his ward, which I couldn't get a clear answer. I assume that means, like, I'm going to take you, like, a guardian, basically. I mean, she was an orphan that lived with a poor family, and he was like, come live with me, child. And so she, of course, did. But the two soon became lovers, shockingly.
That's fucking gross. I knew it was going into some Neil Diamond shit.
I'm a 74-year-old wealthy man, and you're a young, supple 15-year-old girl.
Have you heard Sweet Caroline?
Yeah, so that happened. Frisch made arrangements for Martha to attend prestigious finishing schools in both England and France, because you can't be a high society type dating a young 15-year-old unless she's classy. Then it's okay.
Yeah. I'm so fucking uncomfortable right now.
Don't worry, it doesn't last that long. But Martha, when she was in the finishing school, she enjoyed it. You know, it wasn't against her will by any means. You could argue the whole she's doing it for the station in life, and he's doing it because gross. But she went over to these schools, and she very quickly became accustomed to the high society lifestyle. So Martha, once she finished finishing, I guess once she was finished, is that what they call it at finishing school? Like, instead of you've graduated, it's just you're done.
I don't know. Finished. You use the word finish though so much that, like, it has no meaning to me anymore.
So after she finished, she returned back to Frisch's estate, where she lived with her elderly lover until his death a few years later. Frisch had left his entire estate to his beloved bride Martha, who quickly remarried a man named Emil Marek. He was a young engineer that she'd secretly been having an affair with ever since coming back to Vienna. Because shockingly, 15-year-old girl, well, by this point she's like you're 20, 21. But they generally aren't physically attracted to 80-year-old men by that point. And
damn, my one fucking plan.
Yeah, damn it. Well, I mean, it works until you die, as long as you don't care that they've got their young, handsome side piece over there. So after Frist died, her and this engineer, she inherited everything. And a few years later, she got married to this guy that she'd been secretly seeing anyway. The couple enjoyed their newfound wealth and lavish lifestyle that it, supported until they had bled his bank accounts completely dry. So, I mean, they lived it up so much that this dude was loaded. I mean, he wasn't just like, oh, he was well-to-do. He was loaded. And they basically blew through it all in the first couple years that they had it. So they were forced to, not only were they out of money, but they were forced to sell the manor. But Martha was not ready to give up her expensive lifestyle. So she and Emil devised a cunning plan. Martha would take out a large disability policy on her husband, and then he would just happen to suffer a debilitating injury while chopping wood. Emil apparently agreed to the scheme. I don't fucking get it.
This will work. I'm confident.
Confident. Yeah, he's like, yeah, I like being healthy, but I like money better. So after taking out this policy, he went out to chop wood and attempted to sever his leg with an axe. But the blow failed to cut the leg off. So I got a couple different accounts here. One, it sounded like Martha was there helping him, and the other was just him hacking away. But it says after a few more attempts, they managed to sever the leg most of the way through. So it was still dangling there, but apparently they got good enough. They're like, yeah, that'll work. So Emil headed to the hospital, and Martha filed the lucrative insurance claim.
Emil's fucking dumb as fuck.
Yeah, no shit. Unfortunately for the Mareks, their plan to cash out on his injury didn't go any better than his attempt to remove his limb. While the doctors worked to amputate the leg, because he fucked it up to the point where there was no saving it, he did lose the leg. It also said they had to fight. In fact, all sorts of. Typically, when you try to cut your own leg off with a hand axe.
Yeah. How much do you hate working? To be like, you know what? I don't need that.
Right. Right. But anyway, so while he's in the hospital, like almost dying and losing his leg, the insurance company decides to send an investigator to check out this claim.
It looks like he kept doing it on purpose and was really bad at it.
That's the thing. The fraud was quickly discovered when the doctor told this investigator that the leg had clearly suffered no less than 3 blows from an axe. So there's at least 3 chops. So it doesn't give the exact story that they divide. They said he was out cutting wood and accidentally cut his leg. You don't accidentally cut your leg 3 times. That's not something that you're going to be able to backtrack on your story. Be like, well, maybe he swung 3 times before he realized. Martha had learned that she was being investigated and learned that the doctor had told them that, there was multiple chops to the leg. She knew what the evidence was against her. So she attempted to bribe a nurse to say that the doctor was the one that was lying and that the insurance company put him up to it because they just didn't want to pay out on the claim. It was a noble attempt, I guess, when you're cornered and you try to keep, instead of just admitting that they got you double down. But
you cut off your own foot.
Right. In this case, literally. Yeah. But trying to bribe the nurse backfired because even though the insurance company dropped the insurance fraud charges, of course they didn't pay out, but they said, we're not going to prosecute you for trying to defraud us. I assume they thought Emil losing his fucking leg was enough of a punishment. So they didn't charge her for that, but they did end up getting arrested for the attempted bribery. So Martha and Emil were both charged and did some prison time. Upon their release from prison, the couple moved out of Vienna into a country that I couldn't pronounce, so I'm not even going to bother to say it. And there they started a family. The couple had 2 children, an older girl and a younger boy, but shockingly, they continued to struggle financially. With not much work available for a one-legged engineer, the family eventually returned to Vienna, where Martha took a job selling vegetables on the street. So,
high living.
Yeah, a little bit of a step down from like living off of some old guy's buck in an expensive mansion. Now you're selling vegetables on the street. To make matters worse, a short time later, Emil contracted tuberculosis. He ultimately died from the disease. And to get even worse than that, their daughter also fell ill, and she died just a few weeks later. When the life insurance money quickly ran out, the now twice widowed Martha was forced to move in with her Aunt Suzanne. The elderly Suzanne Lowenstein lived as a woman of moderate wealth. She wasn't as wealthy as Martha's first husband, but she was pretty well-to-do. But she had no immediate family to take care of her in her old age and her failing health. So in this regard, Martha found herself lucky. Becoming Susan's caregiver meant that she no longer had to work in the streets, and she once again found herself living a life of luxury. Not maybe not quite as, walking around with a mink coat for your mink coat, but much better than most people in Vienna at that time. For months, Martha cared for her aging aunt, but it wasn't long before the elder Lowenstein's health gave out. Suzanne, and she passed on. Martha once again found herself the beneficiary of a substantial inheritance. Of course, her appetite for extravagance had only grown, and so she quickly worked her way through all that Suzanne had left her too. So now she was out of money again. She decided to open her estate up to a pair of boarders. Mr. Newman was quick to fill the first vacancy, and then the other was leased out to an elderly woman named Kittenberger, which is an awesome name for an elderly woman. A terrible name for a burger chain. Like, come down.
It just sounds like one of those names, like for just like a pain in the ass neighbor.
Mrs. Kittenberger.
Fucking Kittenberger, fuck off. Like, let me. Yeah, I'm making noise. It's my house. Go fucking home.
Fucking Kittenbergers.
God damn, nosy asshole.
The new tenants enjoyed their stay with Martha, and Miss Kittenberger became particularly close. When she died a few months later, Miss Kittenberger even had taken out a small life insurance policy. It paid out, said £300. I don't know what that translates to. I don't know what modern day pounds would translate to US dollars, let alone back in like
old timey pounds.
Yeah, I guess it's not super old. We're talking about 1930s now, 1920s. At this point, in the story of Martha, the accounts begin to differ. If you're suspecting that the pattern of conveniently lucrative deaths surrounding Martha might not be so coincidental, you're not the only one. The protest of a particular person, Miss Kittenberger's surviving son, seemed to be the catalyst for the ensuing investigation. However, a few of the things that I read had one additional event that they marked. And they said that this is what caused Miss Kittenberger's son to go to the authorities, not her death specifically. Martha, who had she was kind of getting old by this point too, and had suffered a series of seizures or strokes, and now appeared to be quite blind, had called up the local police to report the theft of a handful of valuable paintings, tapestries, and jewels from the estate. The police arrived, and their investigation did indeed conclude that these items were missing, so they filed a report and passed it on to the insurance company. The insurance company, performing their own due diligence, passed the information on to their own investigators. And the investigator that got the case was quick to recognize Martha, because as luck would have it, he was the same one who investigated them for the axe claim. So by this point, it didn't take much to get this investigator to suspect that more fraud was, I'll say afoot, just to tie it back to the axe thing.
So yeah. I don't have to. I appreciate that.
So he decided to search all the warehouses in the city, and he did eventually locate the supposedly missing items that Martha had stashed away. So Martha was once again charged with insurance fraud, and according to these accounts, it was this that caused Miss Kittenberger's son to urge the police to investigate his mother's death. So, I like to believe this part of the story because you feel like, well, it was another failed attempt at insurance fraud, like a very transparent, not even a clever attempt at it that ultimately came back and bit her again. But it seems weird to me to be like, oh, this guy's mother moved in with this woman and then died very quickly, but had for some reason taken out a life insurance policy to pay towards this woman. Like, you'd think that in and of itself would be enough to get you suspicious. You wouldn't think it would be like, well, that's kind of weird. Insurance fraud, you say. Maybe there's more to this. But either way, he went to the police, and the police agreed that something didn't seem right. So they performed an autopsy on the deceased Mrs. Kittenberger. The coroner found large amounts of the toxic metal thallium, and their suspicions were confirmed. So with that, the police ordered the exhumation and autopsy of Suzanne Lowenstein, her aunt, Emil Marek, her second husband, and their daughter, who had all passed away and left money to her. Though surprisingly, they never seemed to order an autopsy of Martha's first husband, Moritz, the wealthiest and probably most one that she'd be most interested in getting rid of, because you're a young girl being forced to have a romantic relationship with this old guy that she probably didn't particularly like. But they never seemed to investigate his death, and maybe it was just it'd been too long or whatever. Regardless, all the bodies that they did examine were found to be poisoned in the same manner. If you're like me, I was also kind of starting to wonder about Martha's son, because they had 2 kids. They found her son on the streets, so he was destitute, but he was rather alive, so good for him.
Good job, you did it.
Yeah, except he was deathly ill, so they rushed him to the hospital, where it was determined that he too had been poisoned.
Jesus, fuck.
Yes. Fortunately, they caught his in time, and he did survive. Martha was quickly arrested for murder, and a trial date set. As previously mentioned, Martha had appeared to have suffered a stroke, and was now experiencing seizures and was said to be almost completely blind. They suspected that she was faking or exaggerating most of these symptoms, but due to her excessive shaking and thrashing about anytime they tried to deal with her, they had to use a special chair to restrain her and carry her into court, which I'm imagining being her defense attorney. You're like, okay, wealthy woman, maybe she poisoned people, maybe she didn't. But I'll get her, I'll do my best to get her off. And then they have to carry her in because she's throwing such a fit. It's like, well, fuck. Bad impression on the jury. During the trial, they heard testimony from Miss Kittenberger's son, who had stated that his mother, prior to her death, had often complained of feeling violently ill anytime she ate something that Martha had prepared. Which begs the question, why do you keep eating things that Martha is preparing? But Martha still claimed complete and total innocence. She said she had no idea what they were talking about, had nothing to do with any of this. And then the court heard testimony from a local chemist who confirmed that she had been purchasing thallium from him for years, which is damning evidence. But it also kind of made me wonder, thallium, when I looked it up, it's a heavy metal. It's a toxin, and it's very, very poisonous. But they said it was rare, but also not uncommonly sold at the time. It seemed really fucking weird to me.
What were people getting up to with it? There weren't that many chemistry majors back then.
And is it normal for somebody to go to a chemist and buy chemicals in 1930, 20s and 30s?
It's barely normal now.
Right. Especially one that, as far as I could tell, the average person's only use for it would be to poison somebody. I kind of wonder if it was used back then as a pest control thing. Maybe they thought she would, whatever. It doesn't talk
You're
much.
trying to be her defense attorney now.
It's just
it's just for rats.
These are the things that I ask myself as I read this stuff, because it's they make it seem perfectly normal that you could go to the store and buy thallium. Yet this was the day, aha! It's well, is he going on trial for selling thallium to this woman? What? Whatever. But anyway, she was certainly found guilty and sentenced to death. A fate that was certainly justified, but kind of unlucky for Martha, as the death sentence had just recently been reinstated in Vienna. So there were some parallels when you were telling your story there. You say, well, they had done away with the death. Vienna had too, but luckily for her, it just came back. Woohoo! While she would certainly spend the rest of her life behind bars, Martha knew that the penal system in Vienna, even though they had brought it back, they never actually carried out executions on female prisoners. Apparently that was like the one time back in the olden times where the advantage was being a woman to being a man, because they just couldn't bring themselves to kill women. Unfortunately for her, though, the control of Vienna had just been seized, and the government was now under the control of one Adolf Hitler, who most certainly believed in capital punishment and also did not care if the prisoner was a woman, and thus her appeal for a pardon was quickly denied. So, she's an awful, awful person, but she's also so fucking unlucky with everything. Yeah.
Of all the people that Hitler's regime killed,
right? Like, he got one right.
This might be the one he got right. Yeah. I feel dirty.
I know. It's one of those things where it's a twist that's like kind of like haha, and at the same time you're like, I can't celebrate that. But
truth be told, I'm not pro death penalty ever. So I can't say he got it right. But of the people he could have killed.
Yeah, I mean. Not could have killed, of the people he did kill, and think of all the people that went to bullshit trials for bullshit reasons and were executed. She at least like poisoned a bunch of people, including her own children and husband.
Right.
So yeah. But now she was confined to a wheelchair at this point. And so it said that the executioners had to construct a dummy, and they spent hours practicing the best way to dump her out of the chair so that her head would land on the cutting block. Having apparently perfected the technique, Martha Marek was executed via guillotine on December 6, 1938. So that's where Martha's story ends, with the mental image of executioners literally pouring her onto a guillotine and then
having to like tip her wheelchair over. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that they were rehearsing that. It's like, we can't fuck this up.
Well, I think even people that are pro-death sentence, most of them over the years and throughout history have figured out that even if you believe somebody should be executed, a botched execution is awful and nobody wants that. Like, you've heard stories of like death row inmates that they go to electrocute and instead they just like catch on fire. You know, it's really easy to go from this person's a piece of crap that doesn't deserve to live to like, oh shit, what are we doing? Like,
right.
So yeah, at least they took it upon themselves to like figure out, how do you dump somebody out of a wheelchair so you can cut their head off?
Yeah. Like, and is she gonna like thrash around and shit pretending to be sick? 'Cause
given everything else I heard about her, I'm surprised she didn't leap to her feet and sprint off. Like, yeah. So I'm surprised she didn't try to cut her own head off and then be like, you can't cut my head off because it's already gone. See? Or like, as she, like, her head's dangling there half severed, be like, hey, good thing I took out head insurance, huh? Where's my money?
It's kind of crazy, like, how she got so fucked up, because, like, only thing, by all indications at the beginning of the story, the only thing that was probably wrong with her, well, besides, you know, the goddamn old creep sleeping with her way too early. Like, besides that, though, it seems like the main trigger in her life was just having way too much money
and then having it
way
taken
too
away.
Early. Yeah.
Right. But
never having to manage it.
And this is certainly we're not going to be the podcast that defends serial killers. But you took somebody that had nothing and she was relatively normal. Then you take a predatory, I'm going to just go ahead and call him a predatory pervert. I know it was common back then, but it's fucking gross.
But society was full of predatory perverts. It doesn't change that they weren't predatory perverts.
Right. Just because it was accepted doesn't mean it's okay.
Right.
But anyway, so her first major life lesson out of anything. I mean, there was no school beforehand. There was no nothing. They lived on the streets and I assume sold vegetables or, that type of,
some sort of modest life. Right?
Yeah. Street urchin, basically. But she did have a family. So she technically had a roof, but they were all poor. So it was just like a commune of the homeless people, basically, just with a place to sleep. But anyway, so as you go from that to having anything you could ever possibly want, but the lesson there is, the trade-off is you're attached to this person, but you have no real feelings for this person. They're just a means to it. basically being married to the first guy was her job. It got her the things that she wanted. So it's not weird to me that she had this like emotional attachment where like people were just means to an end to her. It is unusual that continued on, and like even to her own children, she never learned to develop an attachment to people. It was all more about like, I need money. I want to have money. I can't go back to this poor lifestyle. Yeah. So like,
even though she kind of did, and then like she got it back, and then it was like, well, hey, I'm going to do whatever I have to keep it again. Like, I'm not going to lose it again. Like, I'm not going to get knocked down to selling vegetables in the street or whatever the fuck.
You wonder if like it all theoretically started. By all accounts, like I said, they didn't go back and investigate it. But the first dude, he was old, 74 into his 80s back in 1920, 1925. Old age. There was nothing suspicious about that. And he probably just lived until, he died of either a medical ailment or just got old and died. I don't think she poisoned him. But then she cut off a husband's leg, willingly. And then it makes you wonder if she's like, you know what? It didn't work the first time, but what if this is our story? Can we cut off your other leg? And he's probably like, fuck that. She's like, well, damn it. Well,
no, he was probably like, well, maybe. She's like, he was dumb as shit.
Do you think she ran her plan by him like she did the first time? Like, you know what? Cutting your leg off didn't work, but if I take out a life insurance policy and poison you, we can both be rich. And he's like, yeah, wait a minute. So I don't know. She went... She's all about that money. That's one thing that we can all agree
all about
on.
That bank. Well, yeah, that's Martha and Darya, the hit sitcom coming to ABC Family.
It kind of serendipitous. It's probably the closest we've come doing the show to that. Like we always joke about, like biting us in the ass and having the same topic. Yeah. We both had female serial killers. Yours was more. Yours was way better at it and way more practice at it. Mine, at the end of the day, mine only killed 4 or 5 people. Yours, 100.
Yours was a little more in a fucked up way. Like, it's always fucked up to defend a serial killer, but like in some ways, yours was a little more immature, I guess I would say. Like, it was a real immature, but like kind of
but she
sympathetic,
had a reason.
like
yeah.
Like, she never really got to adulthood.
Oh, she was perfectly groomed to be a sociopathic, psychopathic serial killer. I mean, everything in her early life landed directly on this is where she's going to head. And I'm not saying that like obviously still, if you believe in those sort of things, the vast majority of us would not have turned down her road. But she
that's true about every killer.
Right. But she did have a lot pushing her that way, as opposed to.
I just think there's something a little more, for lack of better words, sympathetic about a killer who is trying to use the deaths for like a financial like gain or whatever. Like, there's at least like, okay, well, in their fucked up mind, this is like a survival.
Yeah, it's not
tactic.
About killing. It doesn't mean that they enjoyed killing or this or that. It just means that that's
like, Like, and it's still barbaric, but like Darya to me was a lot more like just pure emotional, like animalistic. It like enjoyed the inflicting of pain on others, like wanted to really relish in that punishment or whatever. Like, Martha seemed more conniving about it.
Yes. But just not good at it. Very, very.
Yeah. Lots of ways to kill, folks, and we'll touch on a lot of them on this show.
So far between this and some of our other shows, the key seems to be if you're a young, budding serial killer, don't fucking take out insurance policies immediately before killing your victims, because it's
the whole fucking insurance policy thing is just.
I don't know how you ever expect to get away with it.
Yeah,
it's like a literal paper trail leading right back to you.
Yeah, and I just imagine being like the insurance agent, like, I cut off my foot. All right, well,
by accident, get it? It was with an axe. It was accidental.
All right, sir, you used a pun that disqualifies you for at least 80% of your benefits already, but we're going to conduct an investigation.
Yeah, that's
here.
the thing. Martha went to jail for bribery. He went to jail for using that pun.
And winking at the agent.
Wink.
Yeah, but that's the Non-Essential Podcast this week. If you're listening to it, that means I actually was able to stitch this shit together.
Yeah, it makes Ben a wizard, so
yeah,
hop on Twitter and give him a good big thumbs up or something.
Yeah,
or money preferably.
Or yeah, donate enough for me to get a fucking beer, because this week will be fun.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Goodbye. If you want to plug the link or whatever, go ahead. I don't care anymore.
At Twitter, at the non-essential. Or is it See, I don't even know our own links anymore. It's at Nonessential Pod on Twitter. It's the Nonessential Pod on Facebook. We're on Spotify. We're on Libsyn. We're on iTunes. We're everywhere. So, but if you're listening right now, as Ben's pointed out to me in the past, you probably know where to find us. So, good job.
You did it. See you later.